Phyllis Schlafly has been a national leader of the conservative movement since the publication of her best-selling 1964 book, A Choice Not an Echo. She has been a leader of the pro-family movement since 1972, when she started her national volunteer organization, now called Eagle Forum. She was named one of the 100 most important women of the 20th century by the Ladies' Home Journal. Her monthly newsletter, the Phyllis Schlafly Report, is now in its 41st year. Her syndicated column appears in 100 newspapers, her radio commentaries are heard daily on 460 stations, and her radio talk show on education, called Eagle Forum Live, is heard weekly on 45 stations. She served as a member of the Commission on the Bicentennial of the U.S. Constitution from 1985 to 1991, appointed by President Reagan. She has testified before more than 50 congressional and state legislative committees on constitutional, national defense, and family issues. Her newest book, The Supremacists, addresses the corruption of our judiciary and what can be done to correct it. She's visited with us before. Phyllis Schlafly, welcome back to the Global Freedom Report.
Thank you. I'm very happy to join you again.
Oh, it's a pleasure. In your book, The Supremacists, and this is a little bit off topic for today, but I'm just personally curious, you tackle the corruption of the U.S. judiciary and what can be done to correct it. What can be done to correct the corruption that has infected our judiciary? I'd like to know your answer.
Well, one possible way is what we did in the last November election when they bounced out 3 judges of the Iowa State Supreme Court, the ones who had voted for same-sex marriage. And they were up for retention, and it's very, very seldom that any judge gets rejected at that point, but they bounced them all out, all 3 of them.
Yeah, unfortunately,
so that's one thing we can do. But the other thing we can do is to simply not confirm some of the most left-wing appointments. And just a couple of weeks ago, the U.S. Senate refused to confirm a very left-wing judge named Liu, L-I-U, I think his name is spelled, and who had a bad left-wing record, and they said, nothing doing. You're not going on the court.
You know, judicial corruption does hurt education as well. I remember a case several years ago in which a fired New Jersey school teacher sued, and it was found in court that she was incompetent in 2 of the 3 classes she taught. But because the court did not find her to be totally incompetent in her 3rd class, it ordered the school to rehire her. Thus, a dangerous and incompetent teacher was given ongoing access to New Jersey youth by the courts. How much of an influence on the problems with the U.S. public education system are due to the judiciary?
Well, a lot of it. And there are now, I think, 5 of the federal circuits who have held against parents and for the right of the public schools to teach the kids anything they want in their own opinion. In fact, in the Ninth Circuit, the judge wrote that the right of parents over the care and custody of their children ends at the threshold of the school door. Now, these 5 circuits have taken up a number of different cases. A couple of them took up the cases of teaching homosexuality to the kids, and the courts upheld the school's right to do that despite parents' objections. A couple of them took up the matter of these nosy questionnaires, which are such leading questions. You know, how many times have you used marijuana? How many times have you used heroin, and so forth?
Yeah, but why don't if the state is telling them that, look, when your child is in public school, your child is a ward to the state, so you have no parental rights. So why don't the parents just yank the children out of the school? Say, fine, you're not going to teach this to my children. End discussion.
Well, that imposes a cost and a big responsibility on the parent because the child has to be educated and taught. So what's the parent going to do? Now, there are a lot of wonderful parents who have taken up homeschooling. There are a lot of parents, wonderful parents, who have paid the money to put the child in a private school or a religious school. And, but not everybody can do
Not everybody
that.
can afford that. At one point, before the previous segment, I had played a clip. It was from a 1950 50, 53, 54, public service announcement. They used to put this out on the air that, it's not just about having an education. It's about the kind of education you have, because Hitler had a very good education system. And, we don't hear that kind of stuff. We don't see that on television anymore. But that was like a public service announcement. What has happened? I mean, the education system has gotten so far off track, and it amazes me how I still get surprised at it. But what is wrong with the public education system, and how did it get to be so bad?
Well, I think John Dewey is considered to be a great influencer on public education, and his idea was that the educational system was not designed to enable kids to achieve their God-given potential, whatever that may be, and it's different people, but to adapt them to the group, to make them social beings who are more amenable to the directions they get from the government. And that's what he believed. And he was a humanist, and that, I think, he's considered the most influential person in public education. And then you find it's a combination. Well, I think the worst thing is not teaching them how to read. So they can't go to the library and read the great books of the world and decide for themselves. But beyond that, they're not teaching them a lot of things they ought to be teaching, like American history and like arithmetic and the greatness of our country. They're obsessed with terms like multiculturalism and diversity. And then if they want to get really extreme, they're obsessed with something called social justice, which means teaching kids that we live in an oppressive, unjust, racist society, and you ought to organize and do something about it. So,
but who was Dewey that he could have such an influence on? Because just 50 years ago, you were getting public service announcements like the one I just played.
Yes, and if you read the handbook of the National Education Association 50 years ago, it would sound like it was written by the American Legion. It was all full of patriotism and standing up for our country and pledging allegiance to the flag and all sorts of things. Well, it was changed. There's a very specific movement in this country that is determined to completely secularize our society, to get any reference to religion out of any public life, public school, courthouse, public park, or anything else. And they've carried on their battle in the courts, and they've had a fair amount of success. They haven't abolished the Pledge of Allegiance yet, but they're still working on that.
They're working on that one, yeah. How would you, Phyllis Schlafly, what would you say is the proper role for schools and the proper objective for an education?
Well, I think to give the kids the tools of learning so that they will be able to achieve their God-given potential. And I'm a great believer that this thing starts with teaching them how to read in the first grade. And when I discovered the schools were not doing that, my first child was ready for school in 1955. One of the best books on education ever written was Why Johnny Can't Read by Rudolph Flesch. I resolved to use the books he recommended and I taught all my 6 children how to read at home before I let them go to school. And by the time my grandchildren came along, all the phonics books were out of print. They wouldn't teach them anymore. And so I wrote one myself. I think it's the best one available. It's called First Reader. You can get it on my website, eagleforum.org, or directly on the First Reader website. But if you can't read, you're not even you can't read the Bible, you can't read the Constitution, you can't read anything with big words. And there are all kinds of big words that you need to know, and that children know in their oral vocabulary, but they're not able to read them.
And by the way, I so acknowledge you for taking the responsibility. Earlier you were saying that, parents don't pull children out of school because it's a big responsibility. I come from the old school, no pun intended, where if you have a child, you take on the responsibility, and that responsibility comes first. So if the children are not in school, I don't care how hard it is your responsibility to see to it that they are educated in the proper way. And you obviously didn't flinch. You took that on yourself. You didn't entrust their education solely to the school system. And I think if more parents would do that, then, perhaps we'd see a turnaround.
And it's gotten so much worse. For example, I just did a column, which is up on my website now, about the school in Oakland, California, where they have a 2-day curriculum, a little bit different for every grade, starting with kindergarten.
Oh, yes. Yes. Tell us. I was going to ask you about this. Go ahead, please.
Well, to teach them that you don't have to be the girl or the boy you thought you were born as. Make up your own mind what gender you want to be, because gender is something that you can choose. You're not born with it. Isn't that ridiculous? All of them, they should believe in gender neutrality and gender fluidity, and you might be a boy one day and a girl the next.
You see, I think ridiculous is too light a term. Ridiculous says it's like silly. I don't think it's silly. I think that it's like poisonous. By the way, folks, if you didn't quite get that, if you're scratching your head going, this is a school in Oakland, California. I think it's Redwood Elementary School, something like that.
Redwood Heights.
Redwood High? Mm-hmm. Okay, Redwood Heights Elementary School. Well, isn't it an elementary school?
Yes, it is elementary, and they had a slightly different curriculum for each grade. For example, in the 4th grade, they taught them that if you were born with male private parts and you would rather be a girl, people ought to accept that and pretend that you are a girl.
Yeah, and folks, what you need to understand, what they're teaching them is that you don't have to be the boy or the girl that you currently see yourself to be. Okay, that you can decide tomorrow to be a girl and you can decide the next day to be a boy, and that's what they're teaching them in the formative years. When I heard about this, Phyllis, again, I'm amazed that I could still be surprised, but there has to be some kind of outrage. I can't believe that parents aren't up in arms over this.
Well, I think the parents were, but the superintendent was very clear. He said the school board approved this, and that's in line with their instruction to teach diversity and heaven knows what, multiculturalism and so forth, and they're just determined to do it.
How young?
It's kind of like the feminists have a part in this. The feminists were never about equality. The feminists are about interchangeability of the sex. And any sensible person knows that there are very significant differences between males and females. And the idea that we're all the same is just nuts.
How
They're
young?
teaching it anyway.
How young are the children first exposed to this kind of I don't know what to call it. I'm not going to call it a lesson. But how young do they actually start exposing them to this?
Well, in this Oakland, California school, they're starting in kindergarten. They had
kindergarten.
Oh
my God.
Kindergarten. And then there was a famous case, we talked about the courts recently, famous case in Massachusetts where they were teaching, I think it was a kindergartner, about homosexuality, and the parent was very upset. He said the state law in Massachusetts says the parents can veto any sex education that he doesn't approve of. And the school said, oh, this isn't sex education. This is, what do they call it? Equity or social behavior or something else. So they denied it was sex education, and they wouldn't do anything to change.
It blows my mind.
Yeah, I can see. You're almost speechless, aren't you?
Yeah, really. And I'm a broadcaster. You know what that's like. I can't be speechless.
I know.
Who is teaching these lessons, and who is paying for these? Is taxpayer money being used for this?
Oh, sure. It's mostly taxpayers' money. But this particular course in about gender fluidity in the Oakland school was financed by the teachers union, and which of course again is dominated by the liberals, the left-wingers, and the feminists. And you have to understand how unfair elementary school is to little boys. These feminist teachers think that little boys are just unruly girls. I learned recently that they haven't had any recess in the Chicago schools for years. And if anybody who's had sons and daughters know that the boys have got to get out on the playground and run around and do a little wrestling and play tag and do something active so they can come in and learn something. But they simply cannot sit still for the hours like the little girls can. And it is a gender difference. And they won't accept that there's any gender difference.
No, years ago there was a movie made for, I think they made a remake in the 80s, but back in the 60s there was a movie made for public television based on an Ursula K. Le Guin novel called The Lathe of Heaven. And it was about a young man who had the unusual ability to make his dreams become a reality. He would dream something, wake up the next day, and whatever he dreamed actually happened. And so he had a psychologist teaching him to control his dreams. And one night he goes to sleep thinking, I would like there to be peace on earth and no more discrimination, no more differentiation between men and women. He wakes up the next day and everybody's skin is gray. And everybody has the same body part. And the story goes on from there. But that's the reality that some people would like to bring us to. Who actually teaches these courses? Are these taught by just ordinary teachers, or do they bring in special?
Yes, they force. Of course, teachers don't pick the textbooks or the curriculum. They really have to do what they're told if they want to keep their job. So they're taught by the ordinary teachers.
Now, I know that in one commentary on this that you wrote, you had mentioned an organization involved with this called Gender Spectrum. Can you tell me something about who they are and what their involvement is?
That's the organization that is teaching this course in the Oakland school. And if it's there, things, nutty fads do start in California on the left coast and make their way across the country. For example, moving on to another type of course, they had, I think it was for about the 7th grade, they had a 3-week course in Islam, where they were teaching all the kids to dress up like Muslims and observe Ramadan and learn some Muslim prayers and so forth. This is under the category of diversity and multiculturalism. And the parents were so upset, they took it to court. And again, where you have the courts ruled that the school can teach the kid anything they want, and if you don't like it, your only choice is to take your kid out of school.
Which I wish more people.
The Supreme Court refused to take that case.
Which I wish more people would do, however. I understand California is now working on legislation to eliminate gender distinctions, no male or female or him or her, from all school texts. Can you tell us anything about that?
Well, I haven't heard about that specific, but this what we've been discussing certainly is in agreement with what you're saying about what they're trying to do. A lot of that comes from the feminists, and some of it just from the left wing. This notion that there isn't any difference between boys and girls, and they're at war with human nature. They cannot possibly succeed, but anyway, they keep it up.
Now, it's not just gender, what did you call it, liquidity? Fluidity, that's what you said. Gender
fluidity or gender neutrality or interchangeability, those are all words you use.
But apparently that's not the only trend going on. I understand on the other side of the country in Massachusetts, there's a school that's been submitting survey questions designed to encourage teen sex and drug use. And can you tell us anything about that?
Well, yes. And Eagle Farm has been fighting these nosy questionnaires for years. And the questions are not only nosy and none of the school's business. but they are very leading. For example, one of the questions is, the last time you had sexual intercourse, what one method did you or your partner use to prevent pregnancy? Now this assumes that, well, if this kid isn't having sexual intercourse, he must not be in the loop. He must not be one of the group. And then they gave him 8 different options that we don't need to say on the radio, but you can figure out what they are. All different kinds of birth control devices and so forth. And
how old are the students?
No business asking kids a question like that.
How old are the students being given these tests?
They were middle school.
So that's
middle school. Of course, middle school is a period in that's 7th and 8th grades.
So that's like
the child is trying to figure out where he belongs.
11 or 12 or something like that.
Something like that, yeah.
Oh my God.
Here's another question. During your life, how many times have you used methamphetamine, also called speed, crystal, crank, or ice? How many times did you sniff glue?
If you're going to ask...
how many times? It's not whether you did it or not.
If you're going to ask a question like that over a teenager or a pre-teenager, he's going to think it's uncool to say none.
Exactly right. That's why it's so bad. And we did get, Eagle Forum was very instrumental in getting a federal law passed a couple of decades ago called the Protection of Pupil Rights Amendment to stop those nosy questions, and the schools pay no attention to it. They do it anyway.
Because there's no punishment to the schools when they disobey the law. That's, this has been a big thorn in everybody's side. There's no accountability. There's another disturbing trend I see, and it has to do with how young school children are punished for being children. There was a 7-year-old who was dragged away in handcuffs by police to scare him. Just to scare him. There was a 12-year-old with epilepsy tasered by a cop for talking back. Can you comment on this growing punishment trend in schools?
Well, they call that zero tolerance. And for example, there are a number of cases where the kid drew a little picture with his pencil on a piece of paper of a gun, and they consider that threatening, and they might take him away in handcuffs because that's a violation of their zero tolerance rule. And then there are several cases of where a very fine honor student who just made a mistake. They'd been hunting with his dad, and he had an unloaded gun that was still in the trunk of the car, and oh heavens, they wanted to send him off to reform school. And this zero tolerance, if you read our education reporter, we've just had dozens upon dozens of cases that are so outrageous. It just looks like they don't have any common sense at all.
Well, they don't. They are mindless bureaucrats who are just following orders, and what does that remind you about? Just amazing.
That's right. And I hope that particularly this effort to teach the interchangeability of the sexes and to teach homosexuality in the schools is going to make many parents pull their kids.
Well, and see, that's the thing, because if we can't better the education system, and God knows we've tried, then how long do you think American society can endure this poisoning of our children's minds?
Well, it's I've been writing about this for years, and I think it might be 20 years ago that I wrote my book, Child Abuse in the Classroom, which was based on authentic testimonies of parents of what was going on. So we've really, I went to last night, I went to a meeting of our teen eagles, and I looked around the room, and there were a couple of tables of us old fogies who were grandparents. Then all the rest of them were these teens. And we've lost a generation in the middle because the schools have been bad for that long. And their parents don't even know what their own kids aren't getting, what they're being taught that's false and what they're not being taught at all. Because they don't learn anything about our founding fathers. There was one principal of a school who told one of our people, Well, we teach American history from today going backwards, and if we don't get through all that dead stuff, it doesn't matter. Now, how are people going to understand that we are the greatest country in the world? We have more freedom, more prosperity.
I had a woman, a 29-year-old woman, attend one of my seminars in Pennsylvania several years ago, and at the beginning of the seminar, I read the Declaration of Independence so that we have a framework for the rest of the discussion. And she said after the seminar, that was the first time she ever actually read the Declaration. She said, I read the Communist Manifesto when I was 9 years old in public school, but I never read the Declaration in school.
That's right. I'm sure that's true. And they don't know that the Declaration of Independence is our country's great religious document, because there are 5 references to God in the Declaration of Independence.
And I want to make sure I give out contact info because we're out of time, Phyllis. Phyllis Schlafly has been my guest. www.eagleforum.org. That's the website. Can they find out how to get your books as well over there?
Oh, absolutely. You can get my books and my columns and
sign up for the newsletter?
All kinds of things. Yes, my monthly newsletter, everything.
Fantastic.
Eagleforum.org.
Eagleforum.org. Thanks, Phyllis Schlafly.